This is a stone figurine from the Jiroft archaeological culture, found in southern Iran. And this is a wooden rattle of Tlingit people, natives of Alaska. There are 10,000 kilometers and 5,000 years separating these two, yet they depict the same creature, a double-headed eagle. Today, the double-headed eagle is known primarily as a symbol of Russia, but Russian history is just a single chapter in the long chronicle of this mythical bird. In this video, we'll trace the two-headed eagle's origins, figure out how it found the way into the most remote corners of the earth, and do our best to dispel the myths that surround it. Let's start with the most popular of the myths. Many people believe that the double-headed eagle comes from the Byzantine Empire. It's an understandable claim to make. After all, both the Holy Roman Empire and Imperial Russia, the two countries which laid claim to the legacy of Eastern Rome, used the double-headed eagle as the official coat of arms. A single-headed eagle was a recognizable symbol of classical Rome, so it makes sense that some variation of it would be a symbol of the surviving eastern part of the old empire. There are even explanations of how that was supposed to have happened, written by early modern historians. Here's an excerpt from a 17th century Russian manuscript entitled On the Meaning of Flags and Banners. The Caesarians started using the double-headed eagle from the event described henceforth. In the year 3840 from the date of creation, which is 648 from the foundation of Rome, and 102 years before the birth of our Lord Christ, there was a fight between the Romans and Caesar's people. And the Roman burgomaster at the time was the general Gaius Marius. And this Gaius, for the special significance, had placed a single-headed eagle at the helm of each of the legions. And the Romans held this sign until the year 10 of our Lord Christ, during the reign of Caesar Augustus. And at that time, there were some great battles between the Romans and the Caesars. And the Caesars have beaten the Romans 3 times and taken from them 2 banners, that is, 2 eagles. And from that time, the Caesarians took the double-headed eagle for their banner and the seal. Apparently, this story was popular all across medieval Europe. This 15th century tapestry from the southern Netherlands depicts Julius Caesar in full-plate armor, with a shield adorned with a two-headed eagle. European painters were absolutely sure that the Roman eagle grew a second head when Rome became an empire. If you look at any medieval depiction of a Roman emperor or of a Roman legion, there is a good chance that a double-headed eagle banner would also be in the picture. In 1483, a German patrician, Konrad Grünenberg, compiled a massive book of coat of arms, containing some 2,000 of them. Among these 2,000, there are 12 which allegedly belong to Julius Caesar and first Roman emperors. And 9 of those have a double-headed eagle. Only Nero, Otho and Vitellius buck the trend and make do with a single eagle head. This book was Grünenberg's gift to the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III. So there's gotta be something to these ancient Roman two-headed eagles, right? You don't just make stuff up and present it to the Holy Roman Emperor as God's honest truth. Well, apparently not unless you are Konrad Grünenberg. There is not a shred of evidence for any of these crests in ancient sources. Grünenberg just made them up, probably to score some points with the Emperor, by proving that Frederick's own emblem looked like those of Caesar and Augustus. Contrary to what Grünenberg and medieval painters might have thought, the double-headed eagle was not used at all in classical Rome. A single-headed eagle was in fact a Roman symbol ever since the dawn of the Republic, and after the reforms of Gaius Marius, it became the sole standard of the Roman legions. But instead of growing a second head at the times of Caesar, it continued on for centuries in its original form. You can see the Roman eagles on the monuments of Trajan, read about them in the military manuals of Maurice and the court ceremony guides of Constantine VII, and spot them on royal garments well into the reign of the Palaiologos dynasty. The double-headed eagle, on the other hand, only shows up in the last few centuries of the Byzantine Empire's existence. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when it became an imperial symbol. Its first known appearance in the Eastern Roman Empire is this relief from the Stara Zagora monastery in modern-day Bulgaria. It's dated roughly to the 11th century, but it would be a stretch to claim that this was anything close to a Roman coat of arms at that point. This relief is more of an outlier, since there aren't many other Byzantine double-headed eagles from the same period, perhaps none at all. Given its location and date, it's more likely to be of Bulgarian origin than of Eastern Roman. It only gained popularity in the later half of the 13th century, still not as the imperial sigil, but as an artistic motif in sculpture and fashion. We start seeing it decorating churches, the sarcophagi of noble Romei, and the fine silks that they wore. The first time when we can plausibly identify the two-headed eagle as a Byzantine royal symbol is the reign of Andronicus II. An important thing to keep in mind here is that European heraldry wasn't really a thing before the 12th century and didn't fully develop until the 13th. Every noble family having a unique, distinct coat of arms from the get-go may be a thing in Crusader Kings games, but the actual real-life Crusaders didn't have fancy dynastic shields until at least the Third Crusade. Beyond that, having special familial crests made much more sense in the feudal societies of medieval Western Europe than it did in the centralized state of the Eastern Roman Empire. The Byzantines never fully adopted Western heraldic customs, but they still needed to fit in the Catholic diplomatic world to secure alliances and treaties, so they decided to do as those non-Romans did, and get themselves some heraldic symbols. Andronicus II might have been the first emperor to use a double-headed eagle as an official symbol, because the first Byzantine coins with these eagles are dated to his reign. Some scholars cite this image of him standing on a special pillow, called a suppendion, adorned with a two-headed eagle, as a proof that it was an imperial sigil, but I don't think it proves much on its own. These pillows can be seen on the pictures of other regional monarchs from this time, like the Bulgarian Tsar Ivan Alexander, so it might just have been a popular pillow brand, so to speak. Andronicus conducted extensive diplomacy with Western Europe, married an Italian marquise, and had a son with her, who went on to rule the Margraviate of Montferrat. This son, Theodore, quickly became Latinized, adopted Western customs, and founded the cadet branch of Palaiologos dynasty, the House of Palaiologos Montferrat. Here are some of their coins from the later centuries. Admittedly, their eagles are much nicer than those of the parent dynasty. Back in Constantinople, the two-headed eagle was becoming a symbol of the imperial court for the locals, and the heraldic device of the Palaiologi for the Westerners. Pseudo-Komnenos, in his book On the Offices, writes that the eagles were placed on the attire of those who had the title of Sebastocrator or despot, those one step below the Vasilevs. These titles were generally reserved for members of the imperial dynasty, sons and brothers of the emperor, but not the emperor himself. This claim checks out. The images we have of noble Byzantines wearing silks emblazoned with double-headed eagles show either imperial family members or high-ranking officials, not the ruler himself. The emperors are shown with their feet on eagle-adorned pillows, but don't have the birds on their robes. This gives us proof that in the 14th century, wearing the two-headed eagle was a privilege specifically for the second-level members of the imperial court. It wasn't only native Byzantines who could enjoy this privilege. For instance, members of the Genoese Gattilusio family intermarried with the imperial dynasty in the 14th century and adopted the eagle into their own sigils. It didn't, however, gain much traction as a symbol of the Eastern Roman state. The coat of arms of Constantinople in Western heraldic rolls remained the golden tetragrammatic cross on a red shield. Portuguese maps from this period actually used the double-headed eagle not for the Roman metropolia, but for another Byzantine state, the Empire of Trebizond. It's not until the reign of John VIII that the eagle with two heads became both a Palaiologos sigil and an imperial symbol. John used it on his seal and put it on his ship when he went to the Council of Florence. When the empire fell to the Ottomans, many noble families escaped to the west, where they integrated with the local nobility. Many of them, like the remaining Palaiologi, Lascaris and Cantacuzini, used the double-headed eagle as their coat of arms, so it's no wonder that it became treated as the symbol of Byzantium. 15th and 16th century Western atlases either use it exclusively or combine it with a cross to depict the official sigil of Constantinople. So this is how the double-headed eagle gained its reputation as a Roman imperial symbol. An art motif with a resemblance to the classical standard of the legions became the foundation of Byzantine heraldry, not by a fanciful story about Julius Caesar, but out of a need to fit into the European diplomatic scene. When all the cool kids were getting their fancy crests, the Paleologi needed something that projected imperial grandeur, something high status, and the double-headed eagle was right there for the taking. But where did the Eastern Romans get the double-headed eagle? So far, the only thing we know for sure is that it wasn't from Old Rome. Once historians figured that out, they started searching for an outside source of this symbol. They found it in central Anatolia, among the ruins of the Hittite capital of Hattusa. The Hittites were an ancient Indo-European people who inhabited Anatolia during the Bronze Age. The Hittite Empire, at its peak, controlled most of Asia Minor. Their capital was the city of Hattusa, located near the modern-day Turkish town of Bogash-Kale. From there we get our most famous ancient depiction of the double-headed eagle. This relief is from the Sphinx Gate, discovered at the site of Alachahuyuk in the 19th century. And it's not the only one there. There are a couple of dozen artifacts, seals, stelae, and rock carvings. The biggest ones are the aforementioned gates and the wall relief at the nearby shrine of Yazilkaya. This discovery spawned a new theory. The Eastern Romans adopted the double-headed eagle motif because they saw it in one of these impressive Hittite monuments. The symbol itself was thus thought to be of Hittite origin. This presented a nice, simple picture of how it spread to Europe. The Byzantines found a Hittite eagle in Anatolia, took it for their own, and everyone else in Europe decided to use it because it was prestigious to have connections to Constantinople. This was a prevalent theory for quite a while, and it still has a lot of popularity. It's probably the first actually comment you're going to find under a message claiming it is an ancient Roman symbol. However, the more ancient sites were discovered, and the more artifacts were put together, the less straightforward this whole story was starting to seem. First off, the Hittites were certainly not the first ones to use the double-headed eagle. Where exactly it originates is impossible to say right now. The figurine I showed you at the beginning is the oldest that's been found so far, but it isn't the only location where the symbol could have come from. One of the most likely places for this is Mesopotamia. In 1910, this Mesopotamian seal was described in a paper called The Seal Cylinders of Western Asia. It's dated to roughly the 24th to 22nd centuries BC, which predates the findings from Hattusa. The seal was reconstructed from fragments found at the Sumerian city of Lagash. In the early 24th century BC, Lagash was a powerful city-state ruled by the king Entemena. Entemena defeated his neighbors and dedicated a great temple to the patron of Lagash, the warrior god Ninurta. Among many of Ninurta's exploits, the most famous was defeating the storm god Anzu, a giant bird with a lion's head. As often happens in ancient myths, after defeating the great enemy, Ninurta took his powers, so Anzu became one of the symbols of Lagash. In many of the carvings, he is shown as the master of animals, a popular motif in ancient art. The classic depiction of Anzu is him facing forward and holding two great lions in his claws. But like with a lot of ancient deities, there are always variations. Having the patron of the city and his subdued former enemy on the royal seal of Lagash makes perfect sense, and that's what most of the researchers thought as well. There is another piece of evidence at the ruins of Hattusa, which I haven't seen cited to support the Anzu theory, although it seems very convincing to me. When King Anita from Kusara burned Hattusa down around 1700 BC, he erected an inscription with a curse near the Sphinx Gate for anyone who would dare restore the city. "Whoever after me becomes king resettles Hattusa, let the storm god of the sky strike him." The fact that it is placed so close to the double-headed eagle carving gives me an additional reason to believe that this is, in fact, an ancient Mesopotamian god of storms. Another artifact pointing to Mesopotamia is this clay seal impression from Nippur, now in the collection of Penn Museum in Philadelphia. This one is also dated to sometime in the 3rd millennium BC. By cataloging these seals, we can construct a possible trajectory of how the double-headed eagle spread across the Bronze Age Middle East. Starting with these two from the 3rd millennium, we can go to some later samples from the Fertile Crescent. A lot of them come from Syria, like these two from the early 2nd century BC. The images on these are very rudimentary, but we get some more familiar-looking eagles once we get to the middle of the 2nd millennium. This is also roughly the time when those monumental carvings from the Hittite capital were created. The old empires were fallen, and new ones were rising up, but the double-headed eagle remained among the royal symbols of the region. Back in Lower Mesopotamia, the Sumerians were supplanted by the Old Babylonian Empire, which was, in turn, destroyed by a Hittite invasion around 1600 BC. I couldn't find any double-headed eagles from Old Babylonia, but there are later seals from the Kassite period which came after. This one has the familiar motif of an eagle with two lion heads and a bearded figure, who may still be the god Ninurta. Now, however, instead of being placed below the victorious hero, the eagle is in his rightful place in the sky, with two streams coming down from it, fertilizing the soil below. The Hittite Empire was destroyed a few centuries later, around 1200 BC, but like in Babylonia, their royal symbols were not forgotten. This stela from the site of Hamath in modern Syria belongs to the Neo-Hittite period, the time after the Hittites were shattered, but before their splinters were subsumed by the growing Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians may have actually been as important to ancient double-headed eagle symbology as the Hittites. There aren't many artifacts that can be linked to them definitively, but they were certainly no strangers to bird-like creatures with two heads. This here is a reconstruction of a seal of Assyrian king Eriba-Adad I, who ruled from 1393 to 1365 BC. A similar anthropomorphic winged creature appears on the seal of the Mitanni king of Kirkuk from about a century earlier. While not exactly the double-headed eagles we would recognize, there are enough similarities in design to call them parts of the same tradition. The Assyrian civilization was positioned between the Old Babylonian kingdom and the Hittite domains of Syria and Anatolia, so it surely had cultural exchange with both. It is a perfect candidate for the missing link between the Mesopotamian eagles and those from the Eastern Mediterranean. A lot of the Hittite eagle findings are dated to what is called the Assyrian colony period, the first few centuries of the 2nd millennium BC, the time when the Assyrians were very active in international trade and commerce. Add to it the fact that many of the two-headed eagle depictions from Hattusa were found in what was the Assyrian trade district, and it becomes entirely plausible that the Assyrians were the main agents of the symbol's transmission across the Middle East. They may have been the ones who brought the symbol from Lower Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean shore and Anatolia. Then, through trade and intermarriage with the Assyrians, the double-headed eagle entered Hittite art and became associated with their own royalty. Whether or not this exact chain of events is true, we can safely assume that the double-headed eagle is older than the Hittite Empire and had been known to many of the cultures of the Bronze Age. So far, we haven't really discussed the oldest eagle we have on our hands, the one from Jiroft. That's because we don't yet have reliable information about this archaeological culture. The Jiroft complex is something of a mystery. It's considered an intermediate between the Elam culture of western Iran and the Indus Valley civilization to the east, but has many differences from both. For example, its writing script is unlike any other and doesn't fit into existing classifications. The double-headed eagle scepter of Jiroft also has a unique style. Big closed beaks, wings pressed against the body, and circular ornaments, all very different from everything that we've seen so far. If I didn't know from where it was, I would have guessed that it was produced by one of the civilizations of the New World. But the Jiroft eagle is still the best candidate we have for the progenitor of all other double-headed eagles. Obviously because it's the oldest, but also because of its geographical position. Jiroft lies almost at the midpoint between three locations where the two-headed eagle appears in later centuries. The first of them Mesopotamia has already been discussed at length. The second is Bactria in Central Asia. The Bactria Margiana archaeological complex has several seals similar to the ones from Hattusa, like this one with the double-headed eagle holding snakes in its claws. These designs are specific enough to strongly suggest at least some intercultural exchange between those regions. But these seals aren't what seals the deal for me. The BMAC also has the most impressive artifact of Bronze Age craftsmanship, and it's clearly connected to what we've seen in Assyria. I'm talking about this ceremonial axe, adorned with a creature that has a human's body and 2 eagle heads. This warrior fights 2 beasts. His right hand holds a winged monster by the neck, while his left grips the snout of a boar, whose back is bent to form the axe's blade. This is clearly the same creature that we've seen on the seals from ashore. Unfortunately, the Bactrian complex isn't yet studied well enough to establish cultural connections to neighboring regions with certainty. Right now, we can't be sure what other cultures it influenced, and where it spread the double-headed eagle motif. Bactrian eagle artifacts are older than their Assyrian and Hittite counterparts, so it's probable that either the Bactrian culture influenced the Syrian and Anatolian cultures, or they were both influenced by the same original source, be it the Jiroft civilization or something not yet discovered. The argument for the latter is the relative age of the artifacts, but the former transmission trajectory neatly follows the path of Indo-Aryan migration, according to the Kurgan hypothesis. Another theorized vector of Indo-Aryan migration from Bactria was southeast, into the Indus Valley. And there we have another interesting find. The archaeological site of Sirkap in modern-day Pakistan contains a unique double-headed eagle stupa. The stupa is a massive structure with steps going up to a flat open space at the top, with 3 decorative arches on each side. Each of the arches was adorned by a 2-headed eagle, and the remnants of some of them have survived. It's hard, however, to put it in relation to the artifacts from Jiroft or the BMAC, because it's about 1,500 years younger. The city of Sirkap was built by the Greco-Bactrian king Demetrius around 180 BC, but the stupa itself was erected later, in the 1st century AD, after the city was conquered by the Indo-Parthians. The stupa is a testament to the cultural and religious syncretism of the Gandhara civilization. It's a Buddhist religious building, but its decorative arches are made in 3 distinct styles: Hellenistic, Iranian, and Indian. Another ancient image of a 2-headed avian deity can be found way down south, at the Ranganathaswamy temple in Srirangam. This is one of the oldest surviving Hindu temples in southern India, with inscriptions dating to around the 1st century BC. The avian-headed figure is likely Gandaberunda, a form of the Hindu god Vishnu. According to Hindu legend, Vishnu can transform into a 2-headed eagle via his other avatar, Narasimha, who is part lion, part man. He does so to defeat Sharabha, a winged lion form of the god Shiva. The story is similar to both the legend of Ninurta triumphing over Anzu and the scene from the Bactrian axe. Another avatar of Vishnu is actually a wild boar Varaha, so I'd be surprised if this similarity is just a coincidence. The story of Gandaberunda is from Vishnu Purana, which has roots in Vedic literature, but unfortunately it is impossible to accurately date. Again, we have a big gap between the sightings of the double-headed eagle. The 2 anthropomorphic statues are from the early 11th century AD, the Hoysala kingdom period, while the bird-like images of Gandaberunda are even younger. They come from a different region of India and coincide with the worldwide explosion of 2-headed eagle popularity, so we are going to talk about them later. For now, to conclude our trip around Asia, I'm just going to show you these Han Dynasty stone carvings from Suzhou. So while there was a huge gap in double-headed eagle sightings west of Iran after the Bronze Age collapse, this motif lived on in the most peculiar places all around East Asia. From the Classical Age to the early Middle Ages, two-headed eagles were nowhere to be found west of the Zagros Mountains. But around the turn of the 12th century, the situation was flipped on its two heads. It's been long believed that Constantinople was a trendsetter for the double-headed eagle's resurgence, but upon closer inspection, it becomes apparent that the bicephalous bird was already popular in other parts of Europe before becoming a staple of the Eastern Roman court. Much like in Byzantium, eagles with two heads in the West first appear on textiles and garments. Spain is especially ripe with this kind of findings. The oldest we can find are from the 10th and the 11th centuries, like this piece of silk fabric from the tomb of Bernat Calbó in Catalonia, or this tunic of Infante Garcia of Castile from his tomb in Burgos. At least some, but probably most of these, were taken as booty during the Reconquista. This 11th century white-blue wall hanging from San Zoila Monastery is adorned by Arabic letters in Kufic script. It had likely been one of the trophies of the campaigns of Alonso VII against the Almoravids of Al-Andalus. Many of these textiles made their way across the Pyrenees and ended up in France, like this one from Tours. Some even reached as deep as Germany and Austria. The next question is where these silks were produced. Some of you may have heard a story about monks smuggling silkworms to Constantinople, so we know that Eastern Rome was a silk producer. Fine textiles were also produced in Italy, but the most prestigious and expensive ones were those made in Baghdad. And some of the fabrics in the same collection as our double-headed eagles are marked with a "Made in Baghdad" inscription. So this means that the double-headed eagles are also from Baghdad, right? Well, not so fast. Turns out those inscriptions might be lying. Since Baghdad silks were the most coveted and expensive, local weavers in Andalusia added these texts that they could charge extra. Think of these as medieval equivalents of a Chinese knockoff Gucci bags, only this time the locations are reversed. If the silks were actually from China, they'd fetch an even higher price than those from Baghdad. But even though these silks were Andalusian knockoffs, the motifs on them were copied from genuine Middle Eastern textiles. These fine clothes were coveted luxury items all throughout the Islamic world and the wider Mediterranean. Medieval nobles often gifted them to churches and monasteries, where they were carefully stored and sometimes used in burial. That's why so many of them have survived to this day. There are also documents that can confirm their authenticity. The inventory of the Theotokos monastery on Mount Athos from 1143 lists red silks with double eagles, while a 1295 reliquary of the Holy See mentions an altar covered with lions and eagle of gold, red unornated robe with eagle and griffin, and a crimson dalmatic with two-headed eagles. One of these textiles, a red oxamite, embroidered with griffins, two-headed eagle, and opposite standing birds in circular golden medallions, had been gifted by Pope Boniface VIII to his native town of Anagni, and can still be viewed in its cathedral. This particular vestment had been crafted on Cyprus. So this silk manufacturing boom seems to have been one of the main driving factors for the medieval resurgence of the double-headed eagle, and the epicenter of it appears to have been Baghdad, not Constantinople. But what made the double-headed eagle reappear in the region after so many centuries? Some believe that the symbol was brought back to Mesopotamia by the Seljuk Turks, but it's more probable that the two-headed bird never really left this land. The earliest of the silks are dated to the reign of the Buyids, an Iranian dynasty that dominated Baghdad at the turn of the 11th century. The Buyids are known for their revival of pre-Islamic Persian culture. They claimed descent from Sassanid Shah Bahram V, made Farsi a court language at Baghdad, and even adopted the ancient title of Shahanshah themselves. Birds, rams, and other animals arranged in pairs were a typical decoration for the fabled Sasanian textiles, so the two-headed eagles are likely a callback to the times of pre-Islamic Persia. Almost none of these ancient fabrics have survived, but we still have at least one example of the double-headed eagle motif on this Sassanid-era plate still on display in Reza Abbasi Museum. At the turn of the first millennium, Baghdad was very unstable politically, but still a cultural powerhouse that influenced fashion trends across all of the Islamic world. Intensified trade and crusades carried the merchandise even further. Soon these fine silks were all around Europe, the Middle East and even Africa, from Mashhad to Madrid, and from Nubia to Novgorod. At the same time, only the most wealthy could afford these fabrics, so a sort of unified court luxury culture developed. The silks and their ornaments became symbols of high status and royal power. As such, the double-headed eagle started being incorporated into architectural decorations. There are many instances of it in European monasteries and cathedrals, but the undisputed champions of this are the Seljuks. The Seljuks took over the Buyids as the masters of Baghdad, so them adopting the double-headed eagle imagery comes as no surprise. Iranian double-headed birds went well with the traditional eagle symbols of the Oghuz, Central Asian Turkic people of whom the Seljuks were an offshoot. What's mildly surprising, however, is how fervently some of their rulers got into it. These tendencies didn't manifest in the heyday of the Seljuk Sultanate, but only after it was split into multiple smaller states. The most prominent two-headed eagle users were the Artukids of Hisin Kaifa and the Sultans of Konya. The walls of Konya, Ince Minareli Medrese and Divrigi Hospital are just a few examples of Seljuk two-headed eagle decorations. Most of these were built during the reign of Kaykubat I. The fact that this symbol was especially popular with the Anatolian Seljuks led some researchers to believe that it was inspired by Hittite monuments, but we can say with certainty that this is a misconception. 13th century Seljuk art has the same animal motifs as the Iraqi silks which we've discussed earlier. Sometimes there are echoes of pre-Islamic Central Asian themes, like this eagle as a supreme deity atop a world tree. Local Atabegs of Syria and Anatolia were also pioneers of putting double-headed eagles on coins. The first of these appeared at the end of the 12th century at Amida, Hisin Kaifa and Sinjar. With the coming of the 13th century, the popularity of the double-headed eagle exploded. The Crusades helped to boost its credentials in Europe, and the arrival of the Mongols helped it go mainstream in East Asia. The Mongolian conquerors seem to have been divided about the two-headed eagles. On one hand, the rulers of Ilkhanate favored the Iranian lion over the eagle, but on the other hand, the two-headed eagles appear on coinage of the Golden Horde and other khanates from Crimea to China. It's hard to tell exactly what meaning the double-headed eagles had in the Chinggisid realms. The only thing I know for certain is that this medallion from Yuan, China, symbolizes the inevitable demonetization of this video. We've already seen how in Western Europe, just like in Byzantium, the double-headed eagle appeared as a motif on expensive high-status clothing and architectural decorations. And also just like the Byzantines, at some point European nobles started adopting it in their heraldry, in some cases earlier than their Eastern counterparts. The claim to the earliest heraldic double-headed eagle in Europe belongs to Ludwig von Saar-Werding. According to the historian Arno Geyer, the eagle symbol was given to Ludwig as a sign of having received imperial honors. But to distinguish it from the single-headed eagle of the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, it was changed to a double-headed one. I guess Barbarossa's grandson Frederick II had some sort of eagle head envy, because during his reign, the eagle of the HRE also became double-headed. Coins with two-headed eagle were minted in Palermo early on in his reign. The Chronica Majora, dating to AD 1250, lists this as the imperial coat of arms, as does Sigur's roll from the 1280s. The exact reasons for this change are unknown, but we can't discount Arabic influence as a possibility. Sicilian treasures contained some of those double-headed eagle silks, and Frederick II was a known enjoyer of Arabic culture. Eastern influences can also be seen in the coins of Leopold V of Austria, a duke who went in the Third Crusade and had put his banner on the walls of Acre. These are from the late 12th century, some of the first of their kind in Europe. The Fourth Crusade had done its fair share of double-headed eagle promotion in Europe as well. When the Latin Emperor of Constantinople, Baldwin I, died, his daughter Margaret inherited the imperial title, whether to emphasize her status as an equal of the Holy Roman Emperor, or for some other reason. She started minting double-headed eagle coins herself. This may have contributed to the belief that this was the symbol of the emperors of classical Rome. The two-headed eagle adoption was picking up pace as European heraldry was developing into its familiar form. 13th century dukes and margraves weren't exactly paragons of originality, so about 90% of the coats of arms have either a cross, an eagle, or a lion. By the beginning of the 14th century, the Western mythos around the two-headed eagle had formed, firmly connecting the symbol back to classical Rome. Giovanni Villani, in his History of Florence, writes, Pompey the Great had a banner with a silver eagle on a blue field, while Julius Caesar had a golden eagle on a crimson field. But Octavian Augustus, his nephew and heir, changed this crest and adopted golden field with natural black color of the eagle, who symbolized the emperor's authority, because the eagle is above any bird, sees better than any animal, and flies to the heavens, similar to how the emperor is above any worldly ruler. After Octavian, all emperors had the same eagle, until Constantine returned to Caesar's design, but now with two heads. You can see how this version of events played up the Holy Roman Emperor's credentials as the heir of Augustus. Within the HRE, the right to bear the double-headed eagle became a special privilege only extended to a chosen few princes and the free cities. But outside of the German emperor's domain, it was a free-for-all. A 2013 study of French medieval heraldry found that 7% of all eagles on the French coats of arms in the 14th century had two heads. The Nemanjić dynasty put a white two-headed eagle on their coat of arms around the same time or even earlier than the Paleologi, thus laying the groundwork for the national symbol of Serbia. And the Castrioti dynasty did the same for Albania a century later, this time with a black eagle on a red field. But these developments were overshadowed by another two that happened in the 15th century. Back in the German land, the eagle's official status was solidified by Sigismund of Luxembourg. The two-headed eagle now served as the crest of all of the Holy Roman Empire, separate from its single-headed counterpart, which symbolized the Kingdom of Germany. A few decades later, the von Habsburgs would grab that imperial title, never letting go again, and the two-headed eagle would accompany them in all their exploits. Secondly, around 1470, Grand Duke Ivan III of Muscovy started using the two-headed eagle as his seal, likely due to his marriage to Zoe Paleologina, the niece of the last Eastern Roman Emperor. The two-headed eagle had been known in the lands of Rus for a couple of centuries already, but only during the reign of Ivan did it gain an official status. This sigil would eventually become the coat of arms of the Tsardom of Russia, which makes it the predecessor of the most prominent modern two-headed eagle. As the Eastern Roman Empire was being subsumed by the Ottomans, the rest of Europe was entering the age of exploration. In 1516, Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire became Carlos I of Spain, taking over the largest colonial empire of the time. The Spanish conquistadors carried the Habsburg banner into the New World, exploring all across the Americas. And what did they find in the Andean mountains and the jungles of Panama? Well, if it isn't our old friend, the double-headed eagle. Tracing the spread of the double-headed eagle in the New World is a tricky task. It's often hard to tell for sure if the artifact is of purely native design or if it was inspired by European imagery. Still, a couple of them are undeniably pre-Columbian, so there's no doubt that the symbol was present in the Americas before the arrival of the European explorers. The biggest source of these pre-Columbian eagles is the art of the Chiriqui people, who live in what's now the Veraguas province of Panama. The Chiriquis were famous for their high-quality gold work and produced many interesting trinkets and pendants. Some of these pendants are shaped like birds with two heads, though we don't actually know for sure if these are eagles or not. According to the catalogue of the art of pre-Columbian gold, Isthmian bird form pendants were first called eagles, aguilas, when Christopher Columbus sailed along the Caribbean coast of Central America in the early 1500s. Columbus and his men saw the bird pendants being worn around the neck of the peoples of the coast in the manner of an Agnus Dei or other relic. They named the pendants aguilas, a name they have kept to this day. What exactly these birds are is impossible to say. We don't have any written records of Chiriqui mythology from pre-Columbian Panama. The closest thing is the existing indigenous faith of the Bribri people, who still live in the neighboring Costa Rica. The Bribri have a supreme god called Cebu, who is sometimes depicted as an eagle, but can also be a buzzard or a vulture. For all we know, the double-headed birds of Chiriqui pendants could be any of these three species. Similar pendants, but with their own distinct features, come to us from the Muisca people of Andean highlands. The lands of the Muisca, just like those of the Chiriqui, had an abundance of gold. The legend of El Dorado, the coveted golden city, was based on a fable about a Muiscan chief who covered his body in gold dust before submerging himself in Lake Guatavita. Muiscan bird pendants have these peculiar circular eyes or ears with spiraling patterns, which I am at a loss to explain. I found no reference to bird deities in Muiscan mythology, so don't have much material to work with. Maybe someday we'll learn more about their art and solve the secret of these hypnotic birds. Apart from the gold pendants, there's also a jade figurine of a two-headed bird found in Costa Rica. It probably comes from a later date than the metal jewelry. The jade craft flourished in Costa Rica from 500 BC to AD 900. After that, the native artisans' material of choice shifted to gold. These Mesoamerican belts and pendants are the only undeniably pre-Columbian double-headed artifacts in the Americas. But there are other regions with a strong connection to this symbol, just a bit further north. First, there is Oaxaca province in southern Mexico. The two-headed eagle is a popular motif in the crafts of local Mixtec people. But unlike the Chiriqui or Muisca eagles, these ones have a more familiar configuration, so to speak. Like the eagles we've seen in the Old World, they have pronounced legs and heads looking in both directions. This makes me think that the Mixtec eagles are based on, or at least heavily inspired by, European heraldry, and the historical circumstances suggest so as well. Oaxaca was actually a hereditary fief of the legendary conquistador Hernán Cortés. It was granted to him by Emperor Charles for his conquest of the Aztec Empire. Together with this grant of land went a right to display a personal coat of arms, which among other elements featured the Habsburg imperial eagle. It's a fairly elaborate ensemble. The three crowns represent the Aztec rulers, and the seven chained heads are the vassals of Montezuma, all of whom were defeated by the conquistador. So Hernán Cortés became the first Marquess of the Oaxaca Valley and took the double-headed eagle for his coat of arms. The eagles were then featured prominently in local colonial architecture, and likely served as an inspiration for the eagle motif in native arts and crafts. A similar development happened in Guatemala, where the two-headed eagle is used to this day as an ornament by local weavers. The Guatemalan eagle is an echo of the Spanish conquest. A record of it is preserved on a 16th century cloth painting, or lienzo, of the Nahua people, the natives of Central America. The lienzo de Quachquicholan shows a map of the conquest alongside scenes of the Spaniards fraternizing with the local allies. Several Nahua tribes, the Quechquicholateca among them, sided with the Spanish against the rest of the Guatemalan natives, and served as the auxiliaries in the armies of Cortés and the Alvarado brothers. On the left side of the picture, there is a double-headed eagle that symbolizes the alliance between the Spaniards and the Nahua. Its right side is black, like the Habsburg eagle, and holds a steel European-style sword. The white left side brandishes an obsidian-studded wooden club, the weapon of choice for Nahua warriors. Chances are, this is one of the original inspirations for the two-headed eagle of Guatemalan native crafts. The eagle symbol was apparently so popular in Oaxaca that we even have a report of an actual living two-headed eagle coming out of this region. I had doubts on whether to include this anecdote here, but it's mentioned in like 5 different sources. The principal account comes from a book by an 18th century scholar, Benito Jerónimo Feijóo. There is hardly anyone in Spain who did not hear about the body of the two-headed eagle, which came from America in the year of 2003 and is preserved in the royal palace of El Escorial. This rare bird, if it isn't revealed to be a monstrosity, or if one of the heads had not been added artificially, can be considered a new flying species, since we haven't seen anything similar throughout the course of centuries. Many suspect one of the heads to have been added artificially, and even I was inclined to think the same, until Don Alexio Antonio Gutierrez de Rubalcaba assured me that he had examined all parts of the bird with his own hands and complete accuracy immediately upon its arrival in Spain, and recognized without the slightest ambiguity that the union of two heads was natural. That it is not a monster either, but an individual of a perfect species, because the hunter who took it said that he saw it in the company of 3 others, 2 bigger ones who must have been the parents, and another minor one of the same size as the one captured. Sadly, the fate of this extraordinary skeleton is unknown. Whatever happened to it, it's no longer in El Escorial, so there's no way to examine it with modern instruments. The hunter's story about the whole family of two-headed eagles is obviously fictional, judging from what we know about basic zoology. But maybe there's a possibility of it being conjoined twins. Still, the fact that it came from a region where the two-headed eagle is a symbol of royalty is a little too convenient. And its authenticity, hinging on 2 guys saying "trust me bro," doesn't lend it much extra credence. Alright, so what about North America? Obviously, there were many Spanish territories north of Mexico where the Habsburg eagle has gotten to. But let's avoid recounting every corner of Spanish possessions and focus on other sources of origin. For this, we shift our attention much further north and finally get to answer the question from the beginning of this video: how the two-headed eagle got to Alaska. This story involves another European power, the Russian Empire. It took place some 300 years after the Spanish conquests of Mesoamerica. By this time, it's already been a century since the Habsburgs lost the Spanish crown, together with its overseas colonies. The Russians had taken much longer to get to the Americas, because they had to trek across all of Siberia. But by the beginning of the 19th century, they had expanded to Alaska and established the Russian-American Trade Company. Like with all colonial ventures, a conflict with the natives eventually occurred. Russian colonists got too bossy with the local Tlingit people. The Tlingit didn't like that and destroyed a Russian trading post. The Russians then sent a warship that fired on the Tlingit, so they had to retreat to the forest. After this so-called Battle of Sitka, the natives agreed to surrender the land to the Russian Trading Company in a treaty that is of particular interest to us. Its terms dictated that the Tlingit had to cede the surroundings of Sitka and stop attacks on Russian trading posts. To seal the deal, the governor of Russian Alaska, Alexander Baranov, gave the Tlingit a golden medallion of a double-headed eagle. It was explained to mean, "From now on and forever, we will be brothers. You look one way, and we the other way." Following this treaty, the double-headed eagle started to appear in Tlingit native crafts. A Russian double-headed eagle with a mounted St. George striking down the dragon is even displayed on the totem pole in the middle of the totem square in Sitka, which you can still see today. Thus, this ancient symbol traveled across the Middle East to Constantinople, up the rivers of Russia to Moscow, through the Siberian wilderness to Vladivostok, and by the waters of the North Pacific to Alaska. Along the way, it's been the god of storms, a pillow decoration, a royal sigil, and a diplomatic gift, to eventually add a toy of a Native American child to its long list of experiences. Now that we've established the mythical bird on every inhabited continent, it's about time we talked about its meaning. Why does the eagle have 2 heads? The question of symbolism is always a tricky one. Symbols mean whatever people believe that they mean. But there is a tendency today to project those meanings across eras and continents, without any regard to the differences across time and location. So we're going to examine some of the more popular theories on the meaning of the double-headed eagle and put them into context. The most popular explanation of the two-headed eagle's meaning that you're going to find is that it symbolizes the dominion over the East and the West. The earliest mention of this theory is from the commentary on the book On Flags by a 17th century Dutch cartographer, Karel Allard. One eagle was at the times of old Roman Caesars, a representation of their strength, and in the later times and until these days, after the conquest and the unification of two empires, which are in the East and the West, the later Caesars decided to put the double-headed eagle in its place. It makes sense that this explanation only appears in the early modern era. For someone from the Middle Ages, the association of East and West with right and left wouldn't have been as familiar as it is to us. Medieval maps had all sorts of different orientations, and sometimes didn't even align with cardinal directions at all. The North is up convention was often used in antiquity, primarily by Ptolemy, but its widespread adoption had only happened during the Age of Exploration, thanks to Gerardus Mercator. The only connection of the two-headed eagle to geography is the early 18th century coat of arms of Russia. There is an official decree of Tsar Peter the Great that states that the eagle should hold maps of 4 seas in his beaks and claws. In the right head, the White Sea. In the left head, the Caspian Sea. In the right foot, Palus Meiotis. In the left, Sinus Finicus, a half of Sinus Botanicus, and a part of Ostsee. Palus Meiotis is the ancient name of the Sea of Azov, and Ostsee is the German name of the Baltics. Trying to project this eagle on a map doesn't give us an east-west orientation, and we won't even be able to do so without twisting the eagle's body. So I think it's fair to say that Peter the Great did not know about the east-west double-headed eagle theory. We can actually take a good guess at what meaning did Peter place into the symbol by examining an atlas that he sponsored. Symbola et Emblemata had been published in Amsterdam in 1705 by Tsar's personal decree, and it contains 840 different symbols with explanations to all of them. It's largely based on a work of an earlier French heraldist, Daniel de Lafeu. The book's pretty wild, to be honest. It has your usual eagles, lions, and flaming hearts, but also some very exotic stuff like a leaky barrel, a rhino fighting a bear, and a moose man attacked by dogs. Have you ever wondered what is the meaning of Cupid's having a swan polo tournament? Apparently it's let us also be subject unto love. The two-headed eagle makes surprisingly few appearances. Its first version is the Russian coat of arms, placed on the cover next to Tsar's portrait. The claws hold a scepter and an orb, and the motto above says, "The leader and defender against the enemies." The second version holds a bundle of thunderbolts. Its meaning, according to the atlas, is the defense of the majesty. These aren't necessarily the exact words that Peter or any other monarch used to describe the meaning of their heraldic device, but their general vagueness shows that there wasn't any widely agreed specific explanation for the two heads of the eagle. For most other historical states, the geographical explanation would not make much sense either, as very few of them had any geopolitical ambitions directed both east and west. The Quaternion eagle of the Holy Roman Empire could have been the perfect opportunity to tie the two halves to geographical directions, but the coats of arms on it are arranged top to bottom, based on status within the empire, not based on geography. Some suggest that the two heads of the Austro-Hungarian eagle symbolize the dual monarchy, but this sounds more like a coincidence than a purposeful effort on the part of the imperial heraldists. Same goes for the Byzantine eagle. Some researchers theorized that the double-headed eagle was adopted to emphasize the empire's goal to maintain presence in both Europe and Asia, and it fits nicely to the shape of the empire at that time. But we should keep in mind that medieval people did not stare at maps as much as we do, and these allegories would have been lost on pretty much everyone, except the most learned cartographers. The East-West theory is something you may read today in the preface of a think tank paper on the geopolitics of Russia, But historically it only works in a few very narrow sets of circumstances, and there is no evidence to suggest that it was the motivation for any of the original adopters of the double-headed eagle. The other popular theory is that the two heads of the eagle symbolize the emperor's authority over both the church and the state. This one has a bit more of a real historical basis, but it is often misconstrued in an important way. Discussion of this topic requires a brief introduction to church-state relationships. Today, the most popular paradigm for this is the separation of church and state, but this wasn't the case in medieval Europe. Much of its history is about the papacy and the secular authorities, struggling for control over one another. Clerical dominance over secular affairs is generally called theocracy, or sometimes Papacaesarism, while the opposite of it is Caesaropapism. The papal state is a clear example of the former, while Byzantium, where the emperor had the right to appoint a patriarch of his choosing, is often cited as the example of the latter. However, the historical reality was more complicated. Christians were always apprehensive about any single person claiming supreme authority over the church. So while the emperor always had some important privileges, he never claimed to be the head of the church. He could indeed call ecumenical councils and remove or appoint the Patriarch of Constantinople, but he still had to abide by their decisions in all spiritual matters. Recall, for an example, Leo VI's quest for an heir and all the trouble he had to go to get dispensation for another marriage. The real head of the church, according to Christian teachings, is not the Pope or the Roman Emperor, but Jesus Christ himself. So it would have been blasphemous for an emperor to brag about his control over the spiritual affairs. Why then would I say that this theory has some historical basis? Because there is another paradigm of church-state relationships which was considered the ideal of Orthodox Byzantium and which could be symbolized by a two-headed eagle. It's called synalelia or symphonia, and its main principle is that the church and the state have to work in tandem to govern the empire, generally not interfering with each other's affairs, but cooperating when it's needed. On a surface level, it may sound kind of naive and idealistic, but maintaining good relations with the church was one of the cornerstones of the emperor's legitimacy, so they certainly took it very seriously. Cooperation between the Orthodox Church and the Byzantine state became an especially pressing issue in the 1370s, when John V became the first Byzantine emperor to convert to Catholicism. How can the emperor have sway over the church that he is not even a part of? The question was put to a synod, which came up with a formal manifesto reasserting the emperor's religious rights and responsibilities as the leader of the Eastern Roman state. Some scholars of Byzantium think that the adoption of the double-headed eagle as the imperial seal was a propaganda move of sorts, a statement of unity from the de facto disunited church and state. The eagle was meant to embody the idea of synalelia, two separate heads amicably governing one body. The timing of this lends some credence to the theory. This is at least a part of the reason that the same symbol was taken by the ecumenical patriarchate of Constantinople. All this is not to say that spiritual and material duality is the universal meaning of the double-headed eagle, but still this interpretation has more support and evidence than the geographical one. A similar dualist interpretation is also used by the Freemasons, who adopted the double-headed eagle as the emblem of the Knight Kadosh degree. Freemasons take their symbolism pretty seriously, so it's a given that they have an elaborate explanation for this sigil. Albert Pike, a prominent member of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, wrote on it extensively. Ultimately, he derived the meaning from the works of medieval alchemists and hermeticists. As an alchemical symbol, the double-headed eagle illustrates the hermetic axiom of solve et coagula, separating the elements and bringing them together. It is featured in many esoteric diagrams up to the 18th century. So there are many separate theories applicable to certain historical circumstances, but there seems to be no consensus on what the two heads of the eagle are supposed to represent. Can there be a universal understanding of the symbol that was present so widely across so many centuries? We associate it primarily with Orthodox Christianity, but we've seen it being used by Catholic Christians, ancient pagans, Muslims, Hindus and Buddhists. There are even Jewish double-headed eagles. So what's the secret behind the seemingly universal appeal of this peculiar mythical bird? The best explanation we have is the simplest one. I came across it in the Penn Museum catalog entry describing one of the oldest seals that we have seen. It calls the two heads a primitive convention, a substitute for perspective, expressing ever-watchful activity on both sides. Across the ancient world, the eagles were often associated with supreme deity for a reason. They fly high and see everything below. But expressing this omnividence in two dimensions isn't trivial. Whichever way you turn the eagle's head, it would seem that the bird is completely oblivious to what's happening in the opposite direction. You can make him face forward like the lion-headed eagle of Lagash, but the bird's head just doesn't look as noble and elegant from this perspective, and it's very easy to mess up the proportions. Overall, not something you would be keen to do when carving an image into stone. But when you add another head facing in the opposite direction, the all-seeing nature of the beast becomes apparent. That, if you ask me, is probably why this image became such a popular symbol of royalty and divinity among ancient cultures. Let's rewind our clocks back to the advent of the Age of Exploration. As European ships were sailing across the oceans in search of new trade routes, the continent itself was experiencing rapid population growth and profound political changes. But the double-headed eagle popularity remained as high as ever. The development of global trade enabled manufacturers from farther afield to get in on the two-headed eagle trend. Starting in the 16th century, European countries began importing high-quality textiles from China, sporting the familiar avian motif. You can see a distinct stylistic shift from the earlier Middle Eastern silks. However, the most iconic images of the two-headed eagles came not from the clothing industry, but from architecture. With further development of European heraldry, coats of arms became popular architectural decorations. And in the early modern period, there was nobody as fond of placing his sigil everywhere as the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Buildings with his elaborate heraldic device are numerous in all of his vast possessions, from Austria and Spain to Netherlands, Sicily, and even the Caribbean. Probably the most grandiose of these is the one above Bisagra Nueva Gate in Toledo. The eagle on its outdoor facade is wider than its entrance and about 15 meters tall. The descendants of Charles had also produced many monuments, but they focused more on the Eastern Habsburg domains, like Austria and Bohemia. That's why Vienna and Prague have so many two-headed eagles on their buildings. Later Habsburg eagles are often strikingly different from their 16th and 17th century counterparts. With the growing popularity of neoclassicism, their proportion and style had changed. They started looking less like the medieval heraldic symbols and more like the old Roman aquillas. The one place where the two-headed eagle remained unaffected by European trends is India. Here, the Maharajas of Vijayanagara took Gandaberunda for the symbol of their empire at the start of the 16th century. They already had the boar Varaha as their symbol, so adding another avatar of Vishnu probably seemed natural. The Gandaberunda of Vijayanagar is a fully avian creature, unlike his earlier incarnations, which were anthropomorphic below the shoulder. Still, it maintained a unique style. European birds hold scepters, orbs, and swords, but an eagle holding elephants in its claws is something you'd only see in India. These elephants actually had a symbolic meaning. The emblem was adopted during the empire's struggle with neighboring Muslim sultanates, so each elephant represents one of the adversaries: Bidar, Bijapur, Ahmadnagar, and Golconda. Sadly for the Maharajas, the elephants got together and defeated the eagle. After a devastating loss at the Battle of Talikota, the Vijayanagar Empire declined and split into multiple states. The double-headed eagle continued to be used as a state symbol by the kingdoms of Keladi, Madurai, and most notably Mysore, which became the major power in the region up until the British conquest. The last big player in the two-headed eagle game was the Russian Empire. Its usage by the Grand Princes of Muscovy continued on into the Tsardom era, and the original design barely changed, except for the time when Ivan IV toyed with the idea of using a unicorn in place of St. George. In the 17th century, it was added to the first Russian flag and firmly became Russia's national symbol. Peter the Great made the same change that the medieval historians attributed to Augustus, went from the golden eagle to a black one on a golden field. With Peter's ascension, Russia joined the ranks of major European powers, right at the time when the Habsburgs lost their grip over Spain. The architecture of westernized Russia followed the same trends as the rest of Europe. The amount of Baroque and neoclassical buildings adorned with two-headed eagles in Russia is greater than anywhere else in the world. Even though many of them have been removed during the communist period, the post-Soviet governments of Russia made an effort to restore the more impressive ones. The prominence of the two-headed eagle in Austrian and Russian heraldry led to a situation when the coats of arms of both empires had two different eagles with two heads each. Russia got its set after adding the emblem of the Kingdom of Chersones to its greater coat of arms. The minor two-headed eagle on the Austrian sigil represented the imperial free city of Trieste. As we've discussed previously, displaying the double-headed eagle was a privilege granted to the free cities, and there were dozens of them across Habsburg domains. But only Trieste managed to gain enough significance to eventually be featured on the main shield. It's in the very bottom of the composition, wedged between the countries of Gorizia and Gradiska. But that's not all. In 1867, the Habsburg Empire became a dual Austro-Hungarian monarchy, so a Hungarian coat of arms that used to be relegated to a minor status was now to be displayed in full alongside the Austrian one. And the Hungarian coat of arms had its own two-headed eagle for the free city of Fiume. So now the full coat of arms of Austria-Hungary had not one, not two, but three different double-headed eagles, each of a different size. The turn of the 19th century was another peak of popularity for the double-headed eagle, but its prominence soon started to wane. First, the Holy Roman Empire was dissolved by Napoleon, confining the Habsburg eagle to the limits of its Austrian domain. Then the Kingdom of Mysore lost its sovereignty to the British in 1830. In the aftermath of the October Revolution and the Civil War, the Russian eagle was supplanted by the hammer and sickle of the Soviet Union. And as the Habsburg Empire fell, the Austrian eagle lost one of its heads. Serbian independence presented a temporary gain for the double-headed eagle, but following the Second World War, the now communist state of Yugoslavia had exchanged the Serbian eagle for the Red Star. In 1947, Albania was the only sovereign state with the double-headed eagle as its symbol. After the fall of communism, however, the eagle regained some of the lost ground. Russia and Serbia reinstated their old symbols in the 90s, and Montenegrin independence brought the number of two-headed eagles on the world stage up to 4. Russia doesn't feature it on the flag, unlike Serbia, Albania and Montenegro, but employs some creative use of the eagle on the emblems of its government agencies. The Postal Service eagle holds horns, the Treasury eagle has scales and a coin, and the Alcohol Market Regulation Service eagle holds the rod of Dionysus. The coat of arms of Armenia has a small two-headed eagle of one of Armenian historical dynasties. Many regions, cities and towns that used to be parts of the Holy Roman, Spanish and Russian empires have retained their double-headed eagle heraldry to this day. The Gandaberunda of Mysore is now on the crest of the state of Karnataka. Byzantine eagles are on the emblems of Greek football clubs, while the Seljuk ones are on those of the Turkish. The double-headed eagle is an emblem of humanity in the space fantasy universe of Warhammer 40k. This one has one of the most elegant explanations of its meaning. The left head looks to humanity's past with a seeing eye, while the right head is blind, representing the unknowable future. Or maybe the seen one represents the material world, and the blind one the immaterium. Or maybe the heads represent Terra and Mars. No one could actually tell me for sure. Even in a fictional universe, they can't decide on what it is supposed to mean. Sometimes the eagle even had 3 heads. Kings, tsars and emperors sometimes played with an idea to add another head to the eagle, to make it even more grand, but probably deemed it too tacky. Russian architects often used the 3-headed eagles with 3 wings on spires of tall buildings, made so that the eagle looks 2-headed from every perspective. The modern standard of the President of Turkmenistan has a 5-headed eagle. I think that it's meant to symbolize his dominion over east, west, north, south, and the secret 5th direction, accessible only by the President of Turkmenistan. We have seen the double-headed eagle featured across 4 continents and 5,000 years, so we can say for sure that this symbol can't be claimed solely by a single historical state or a culture. Its chronicle is long and storied, and the final chapter of it is yet to be written. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have questions left on the topic, feel free to put them in the comments. I'd like to give special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Mulai Cherkawi, Conventus Orbis, Pikimis, Mikius Porcius and others. And for the rest of you, thanks a lot for watching to the end, and I will see you in the next one.